It's International Women's Day today, and what that means is that we use this day to raise awareness about women's equality, about gender parity, and use this day also to lift one another up. And I have a guest on Lovely Greens today, Liz Zorab, and she and I both have written books recently. Hi Liz, how are you?
Hi Tanya, I'm very well, thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me to join you today.
It's a pleasure, and it was also a pleasure getting a preview of your new book, Grounded. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
So Grounded has been 5 years in the making, although I've only written it this year, and it's the story of converting a field into a productive growing space. And it takes us through, or it takes the reader through the journey that I've been on, through being really quite unwell when we moved here. I'd been bedbound for about 4 or 5 months before we moved here, and I started off on walking sticks, which was a very slow process to develop a garden. And I designed the garden to allow me to be in a wheelchair should I need to be. Now, luck would have it, as I have done more gardening and as I have become more well, the need for wheelchair access has disappeared completely. But I built it in at the beginning because it's so much easier to design it that way than have to remodel at a later date, particularly if I'd got to the point where I needed a wheelchair. Remodelling the garden with that disability would have been harder. So I turned a blank field into a space that now provides about 80% of the food and drink that we consume each year, and I wanted to share how that happened, how that made me feel, how that affected me, how it affected my husband, and how it has changed our lives completely. Just so through that gardening, through that developing the garden, it's developed us as well.
So when you started, you said you moved to your home and you were already bedridden, and you got yourself up and you started a garden. I think a lot of people, when they think about being unwell, that you need to stay in bed, you need to rest. Do you think that being out, developing that garden, did it take it out of you, the energy, or did it do the opposite? Did it actually rejuvenate you?
It did both at the same time. So it physically exhausted me, and I had to do little and often. So I would do a little bit, and it would be just a very small amount, and then take a break. But emotionally and mentally, just being out there, being creative, getting my hands in the soil, and believing in this empty space was going to become this abundant food paradise. Just that belief then lifted my spirits, which meant it was easier to go out and do the next bit of work. So it was literally swings and roundabouts all the time. I would be exhausted, but mentally I was really excited and rejuvenated. Why do I garden? I garden because there's something innate, something inside me that drives me to be out in the fresh air and to be a part of the environment. So I work using as many natural methods as I can out there, and that part of being a part of something larger than the shell that I live in is intensely enriching. It's something quite profound. So it's not just about the physical effects of working with soil, which has that wonderful bacteria that releases all sorts of hormones and processes in our brains, which can reduce stress and anxiety and depression. It's more than that. It is something about in being so enriched by being part of what is out there. And I spend quite a lot of time doing intentional observations. So I don't just, well I do, sit with a cup of tea in the garden, but I spend time just watching and listening and not doing anything but other than just being in that space. And that looking and that time spent observing is not only enriching mentally, but it gives me the space and the time to think and to breathe, and I find it really healing. It took about 2 years to create the garden enough that it was feeding us, and I was giving small veg boxes away to some families at Christmas. And so in the 3rd year I then decided to trial a very small CSA scheme, and that's a community supported agriculture. And the idea is that local residents agree to buy a veg box every week for the season, and I chose my season to be 20 weeks. So I had a commitment from them at the beginning, so I knew how much I needed to grow, which took the uncertainty away from me. And not only that, but they paid for those vegetables at the start of the season, so they paid for the whole season in advance. And that allowed me to have the money to buy the seeds and the compost and the security of knowing that was already sold. And that having that security of mind, or security of the sales, is actually a really good thing about it. It drove me to produce more food, to make sure that I had produced more than was necessary. So in the 1st year I did 7 veg boxes, as well as all our own food. And in the 2nd year of doing that, so that was our 4th year. I think I've got the years wrong, but the 2nd year of doing the veg boxes, which might have been our 4th year or our 5th year here, I can't remember now, I did 20 veg boxes, which was a huge step up. And to be honest, was probably too big a leap. Next year there will be fewer. I'll probably do about 12, just because that's about where it's comfortable for me to, for the amount of work I want to do in the garden. One of my favourite sayings is, think big, dream big and start small. So rather than saying, I'm going to do this huge thing, start with something small and manageable. And then you don't get overwhelmed by the enormity of the task ahead of you. So if you concentrate on one area at a time, and that's exactly what I did. We created 1 or 2 raised beds at a time, built those, filled those, got plants into them growing before I then went on to the next ones. So that thing of dream big, have the whole picture in your mind, but don't feel like you need to do all of it at once, because it'll still be there next year and the year after, and so on. So it also allows you to manage your learning time as well, because there's so much to learn. Every day is a school day for life as a gardener, and you don't need to know it all at once. What you do need to do is enjoy what you're doing, because if you don't get some pleasure from it, you're going to give up.
There are so many really useful tips, just really practical things peppered throughout your book. And I really do think that it will help the beginner, but also people that have years of gardening under their belt. And there's actually a bean structure in there that is just so ingenious, and you might actually see it in my garden in the coming year.
I hope so.
I've already took
a bean structure that makes the beans very easy to pick.
But also great for windy areas, and the Isle of Man is just as windy as Wales. So Liz, where can people find your book?
So my book is available on my website, which is bythefarm.com. It's also available in bookstores online, at Amazon, and also at permanent publications.
Brilliant. Thank you for coming on to Lovely Greens. And I also want to let you know that we've recorded a second video, and that is going to be over on Liz's channel. And I'll put a link to that in the video description, but also there'll be a link up on the screen as well, and you can follow that over to have a watch of that. Thanks again, Liz.
It's been brilliant. Thank you so much, Tanya.